Tēnā koutou katoa, he uri ahau me ngā toki mā te whāroa, mā huhu ki te rangi waka. Tēnā koutou e hui mai nei. My name is Renee Retimana and I'm here from Payments New Zealand today. My brief for you is, it might not be so as fun as the previous panel today actually. And I did say to Michelle, just cut that bio short because that is lame to go through a bio. But maybe this content might be a little bit drier because the brief that I had for you today is to take you through what open banking is, and we'll start up from the basics. We'll look at our journey in Aotearoa New Zealand, what's happening around the world, and what those opportunities are that you may be particularly interested in terms of financial capability, financial well-being, and then what it might look like coming next, which is a little bit of a crystal ball kind of scenario. So that is what we're going through today. Usual disclaimers when we get to the use cases, they're just broad use cases. Don't take any financial advice from me, that's for sure. But there is a lot of opportunity for fintechs. Open banking, so let's just start here in open banking because there is a lot of opportunity. So what is open banking? And it's described in different places differently. And it's important to start here because it looks different in every country that it's been put into, and every regulator in every country, different regulator, talks about it a bit differently to the market, to the industry. But what you actually just need to keep in your minds is really what is an API, because that is the basis of what open banking is. And it is weird to start in this place and then work out to the consumer. But if you keep in your minds the next two slides about what is an API, then that will give you a bit of context for how open banking shapes up and then what spits out the other end of it. So an API is an application programming interface. You hear your techies talk about them all the time. It's basically that connecting, that bridge between one system and another. And the icon at the top there is Uber. So if you've used an Uber before, Uber is what we call a front-end app. It's the app that you have on your phone. But it has to talk to other back-end systems or servers. And so if you've ever used Uber, it sends an API out to Google Maps. And it says, Google Maps, tell me where this person is. And Google Maps then sends it back in, the Google Maps server sends it back into Uber to pinpoint your location or where the Uber's coming from. So that's one way to think about what an API is. It's a secure connection between two systems, a front-end system that a customer's using and a back-end database server or other app. The other way to think about what an API is the restaurant analogy. You want to make an order, so your waiter is the API, your serving person. So you sit there, you want to order something from the kitchen, the server takes your order, goes to the kitchen, they fulfill your order, and then the waiter brings it back. So if you think about that in a technology sense, that may help you to figure out where we go with open banking. Why APIs are important and the basis of open banking technology everywhere is they are direct connections. So they are a direct connection between like the waiter analogy or the Uber analogy, they're direct connections between one system and another and back again. So they send a request out and they get something back for that. And the reason why we talk about standardised APIs is because then you start to form a system around these connections that are governable, secure, you have consent from the customer, no point ordering your food, someone else ordering your food for you, or the table, 3 tables over there ordering your food for you because they don't know what you want. You haven't consented to fish and chips today, you want something else. So open banking and open banking APIs start with customer consent. There are no other ways around that. That is inherent across all open banking regimes around the world. And they're set to help scalability and functionality. And all of that together creates a trust framework for open banking. What isn't so great though is there are still APIs out there. I mean, it's the tech kind of basic 101. But there are alternatives to open banking, and they sometimes talk about themselves as open banking. But these are methods of impersonation access. So they are indirect APIs there where a solution or an app or a service that you might be wanting to use as a consumer do not use direct APIs. They use impersonated access. So, and I'm sure some of you can think about examples. There is a proliferation of examples coming. I think this is definitely a place where our regulators need to maybe step into and lean into a lot. But becomes a bit of an unsafe zone for consumers, because while the services might be, they might be the best actors in the world, and we've got some great people in New Zealand at the moment using this type of technology, it's not governable, it doesn't fit into any regime. So this is a bit of an area, and something as these open banking services kind of proliferate, something actually for all of you to start thinking about, and for all of us to start thinking about, is how we can guide consumers and businesses and what ones are safe to use and ones that may have a bit more risk in the banking world. The risk of using this is that you actually break your bank's terms and conditions, because you have to give away your customer login details and they act as you in another app. So it's been long talked about. It's something that we actually really do need to get a handle on, and we really hope that the consumer data right work actually starts to address that area of the ecosystem. So the state of play around the world. This is what open banking looks like around the world, and that's quite a complex diagram. But the dark blue is regulated open banking. The light blue is market-driven open banking, and you can see the US up there. I was going to say cowboys and girls of fintech innovation, but they love a bit of impersonated access over there, actually. I mean, they've got some great, their banking system's interesting too, so they need a lot of fintech innovation, and they don't have internet banking equivalents, so you can kind of see how they've evolved there. And the orange part is hybrid forms of open banking, and you can see around Aotearoa in the bottom there, we're just actually a little bit of a mixture of all types of open banking at this point. And I'll talk about it now and I'll explain a bit more later. Payments New Zealand, with the payments industry, set up the API Centre a few years ago now, and that basically is what we call a trust framework for open banking. So we develop standardised APIs, we have lots of frameworks, we've got partnering, we've got all sorts of things that go on in there. But the framework of the API Centre, or what we are starting with in Aotearoa, is that we took an innovation first. So these are the kind of foundations of it. It's around innovation first, being market-driven, industry-led, being inclusive and open and distributed delivery. But where we differentiate ourselves, and just because we have, and we'll have to figure what we look like going forward, is in New Zealand, the open banking at the moment through the API Centre is about payments, it's about data sharing, and it's about digital enablement, compared to that global picture, the picture of the globe that I just put up. In other markets, they are often one or two of those things. Some of them are three. So in the US, it's payments or data driven, open banking models. The UK, which is the foundation of all open banking, came out of a European Union directive way back in the early 2010s, 12, something like that. There was a bit of legislation up in the European Union called PSD2, and that was the Payment Service Directive 2. And so in Europe and the UK in particular, the UK coined the term open banking, and I think every country's been stuck with it since. We get stuck with a lot of things from the UK. But yeah, so they kind of coined the term open banking with what they did, and what they offer is payments APIs and data APIs. In Australia, they only offer data APIs, and I'll talk a bit about that soon. They haven't gone into payments APIs. And then up through Asia, you can see the mix of data-driven digital enablement and payments. So that's a little bit of like how it shapes up, and that's why every it's quite hard to compare one jurisdiction to another because there's different drivers sitting in behind how they have evolved and what their models do. Our open banking, where we are now with the API Centre, was actually underpinned by our payments modernisation strategy. So a little bit like Europe and the UK, we're a bit more similar to them than anyone else. It's because we've actually evolved out of a payments modernisation journey. And this is a busy slide as well. But our modernisation journey is actually for all payment systems. So open banking is like a subset of payments in a data economy ecosystem. But our modernisation journey for payments is looking to move to digital enablement and digital infrastructure. And of course, those of you know the payment system, but everyone's a user of the payment system. It needs to interoperate very smoothly, needs to be efficient. We would love it to be as cost effective as possible with low costs. So what moving our system now is a little bit electronic. It's web-based, obviously, and app-based, but we want to move it into digital infrastructure. And once you do that, once you speed up the velocity of money moving through the system, once you can send more data with your payment, once you can program more types of what we call payments instruments or services, then you can start to enable all of the things that you are here thinking about and wanting to achieve around financial inclusion, financial resilience, and helping New Zealanders to achieve their financial goals. So that's our little modernisation journey. As the Minister said this morning, regulation is coming. I think every Council of Financial Regulator, COFA, Council of Financial Regulators, regulator, is involved in open banking. They all talk about it a little bit, same but different actually. So the Commerce Commission was, I think maybe mentioned earlier by the Minister, they've put out a couple of consultations lately on their market study into personal banking, the designation of retail payment system, and a direct letter out to current API providers in the API Centre, and they're looking basically at the competitive environment in this area. It is the pathway for a lot more fintech innovation and a lot more players to, directly connect in those direct APIs into the system. MB's looking at the consumer data right legislation, and we were quite, there was a lot of feedback over, I think that came out in about 2021. The first consultation, and it's good to hear it's imminently going to head into the House, and that is required. Even though we are kind of pro-industry and the market doing good things, that type of legislation is required to help consumers and businesses and really make sure everyone's doing the right thing with the data. Once you start sharing data, and I'll share some use cases and some consumer research a bit later, there are great fears by consumers and businesses about who has access to their data, what people will do with it. And so the consumer data right is probably well overdue legislation, and I don't think you'd get anyone in payments or banking or financial services that doesn't agree that. And that was just a bit more about the consumer data right, but I think we've covered that. The Minister did say the consumer data right is bigger than just open banking though, and it does look out into other sectors, so we'll be really interested to see what is in the bill. So, in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, we kicked off, it has taken a while, I will admit that, and I saw Chris Farfoy down the back. It's taken a while if you're still there. Oh, he's disappeared. Oh, well, that's good. I don't have to apologise then. It has taken a little while to get up and running. We had some really good impetus pre the dreaded COVID times, and then things slowed down a little bit. But that impetus is back on in terms of the evolution of open banking here. We kicked, as I said, our API Centre, the open banking standards were born out of a modernisation strategy in 2017. We've released standards, and then we put in a very light touch framework. And actually what we've had to do since 2017 is start filling in the framework, so start filling it in with partnering activities. We had to build a due diligence service, we've built a proof of concept service, we've built a sandbox, we've built lots of things to actually help enable this partnering to occur between third parties and banks. And so late last year or early this year, we've actually also applied to the Commerce Commission for an authorisation, which is quite a lengthy process and quite detailed if anyone's ever going to go down that track. It takes a lot of time and effort. Make sure you've got enough people to respond to the questions. But we're waiting to hear back about our application. But basically, we were asking for permission to set up an accreditation framework for open banking. Unfortunately, when you don't have the legislation to accredit partners, you have to work bilaterally on that, and that is one of the levers holding back open banking in New Zealand at the moment is around partnering, is third parties partnering with banks. Each bank has to go through their own due diligence, their own bilateral partnering, and we've tried to do as much of that centrally and standardise as much of that as possible, but you hit a bit of a competition point, and we can't bring that together without the Commerce Commission's approval. So that is going through. At the moment, this is what we've got. So this is a bit technical, but in terms of those APIs that I talked about earlier, we've got an account information API, and that's what a lot of you would be interested in, actually, I think, because that API will, the message, what that API goes to look for is information that sits in a customer's account. So that could be the account transaction history, it could be the balance of the account, it could be cross-checking the address or any details in a customer's account that would go and check for that and return that back to the service that's asking for it. So just maybe so I'll talk about that and then I'll show you a picture that might explain that a bit better. And then we've got a payments initiation API, and that's just basically make a payment, like a normal internet peer-to-peer payment. Not necessarily peer-to-peer, but that is just what we call an electronic credit payment. So that is make a payment. So we've got go and look at the account and give me back some data that's sitting in the account for something. We've got to make a payment, and then we've got event notification, so letting people know what's happening there, and then that's built on extensive security standards as well. So how it works is that's kind of like the API centre, all those little bubbles that bring stuff together, and then basically what we do is we have third parties and we have banks, and they all have to meet our terms and conditions, and their joint customer is the one that wants to do something with this API. And as I said, everything starts with the customer, so there's no data exchange, there's no payment to be made without the customer at the heart saying that that's what they want that third party to do. So it's an interesting change in relationship for banks because they're not the primary relationship holder in that moment with that customer, but they are working with a third party of whatever kind, and I'll talk about them here. They're working with a third party that is providing a service to their customer, who's also a joint customer at one of these banks. So that is essentially what it looks like. At the moment in our API centre, we've got the 7 API providers, and we've got 15 third parties, but they go up and down. We've actually got a pipeline of about 320 contributors, and I'd say half of those, about 150, are keen on using the open banking APIs. So there is quite a big pipeline of interest in that. So open banking use cases, we'll just go into there. Here are the main kind of 5 use cases, and then there's the other category. So financial management is one use case, very prevalent in the UK. A lot of personal financial management providers connect into the open banking rails to get customer information and data. Onboarding automation is another one that Customers, particularly business customers, are very keen on accessing finance, lending, rentals, income verification, credit scoring, affordability checks. That's the type of information that you can ask for out of someone's bank account. Payments is a big use case, so often what we're finding around the world is payments. You have the front end stuff there, they go looking for information or data to do something, and then the payments is the action off the back of that. And record keeping, the accounting software firms are very interested in record keeping. And then there's the other, and what we have found here in Aotearoa and around the world is that some of the other use cases are really interesting. There's been virtual swear jars, there is, which actually does sit under financial management, but there's this kind of sweeping services. So you can kind of top up a payment. Something was $3.60. You could ask them to top up to 40 cents, and it would sweep it away into a savings account. They can use open banking data, account information data, for carbon credits to analysis. You have to put it with some other information, but it actually forms the basis of that. And actually, in the early years of open banking, Deloitte Australia had actually mapped that, and you would all know this way better than me, but it was a very interesting pilot that they were doing with open banking, customer information, particularly around account history or account transaction, and actually applying that to well-being and how that person was acting, and kind of the state of mental health at any time, because when people are in having issues with their mental health, you can actually see their through their financial life as a little bit of a flag of what might be happening to them personally. So there's some very interesting use cases. They are quite broad. The information that you get out of a bank account, obviously, though, needs to also be probably complemented by other insights and information as well to get that type of rich data. A couple of current use cases in Aotearoa that are live, but there are more than this. Worldline, if you've ever used online FPOS, works on our open banking APIs, and so does BlinkPay, who sits in the payment gateway at Sharesies, on the Sharesies app. And BlinkPay is a Māori-owned and run, I think maybe the first Māori fintech company in New Zealand, doing some great things. So these are two payments use cases, but what you might be interested in is this, which is coming later this year. We've just done some consumer research, and along the top there, the 18 to 34 over to 65 is age range. I just realised that as I'm talking. But we looked at a couple of areas, and we've done some consumer research and asked people just a few months ago what these common use cases and their interest in them. So as you can see, and I'll flick through the next 3 slides, obviously over 65s, or maybe not obviously, but over 65s are less interested in using this type of service or these types of technologies. Younger people are more keen, and I would be actually really interested in your insights on what this is telling us in terms of the types of solutions or services that can be built to support this. So in terms of account management, bank account switching, loan applications, as you can see, the young people are keen, and as we get older, maybe we're more sophisticated, we know a bit more, maybe we're not interested, maybe that's obvious that over 65s aren't applying for loans or not, or know how to navigate that space. So a lot more analysis needs to be given. Financial management, so managing bills, the aggregation, the budgeting, the product comparisons. Again, not, I suppose 60% is a pretty decent number, but that's probably enough to get a fintech use case going, actually. But as you can see, kind of peters off that 18 to 44, pretty similar, and then just kind of trickles down, and then keeps falling off the cliff at 65 plus. In terms of making payments, a little bit more even maybe across the board, splitting bills, the savings round-ups. 18 to 44, pretty keen on that, less so as you get older. And it might be just also digital literacy has probably got a big place to play in this as well, and around using apps. The real things that are holding people back, though, and this is where it's a joint effort by all of us, by regulators, by all of us that work in financial services, by those of us at the heart of the standards and the rules and the framework, is that people, and it's more profound in over 65s, but across the board, everyone's got security concerns. There's a real lack of trust, and so this is a lack of trust in not necessarily banking, but in the solution between a third party and a bank. They're worried about losing control of their data, and there's quite a lot that actually just prefer the status quo, which isn't that great when we want more competition in some areas of our sector. So if you feel like you want to trust the status quo, that kind of leads them to being a lot more sticky. And so, we want more innovation, we want more of these types of services and products in market. But, there are real concerns, and some of them are education, and some of them are getting used to and touching and using products and feeling safe by it. But we've got a big job ahead of us to make sure that they know which solutions are, API direct access versus what's impersonated access, and that's going to be a bit of a challenge for us going forward. So where to from here? This month, actually, these 4 banks down, the 4 biggest banks in New Zealand, have to have their version 2.1 payment initiation standard. They have to be ready with that, and they have to be ready to partner with it. They still have to set up partnering with those third parties who are registered API providers. But this minimum implementation plan is something we put in last year. It took us a little while to consult and get there. So this year, that's going to cover 80% of retail consumer bank accounts. Kiwi Bank needed a bit longer, so they're hitting 2026, and then 90% of accounts will be covered. The Commerce Commission's come out and they want more providers involved in that. So it'll be interesting where that comes to. Account information, which is all of that account, balance, transaction history, that's due by the 30th of November this year. And then we're actually up to version 3 of the standard. So the next biggest range of standards is version 2.3, and we've just finished consulting on that, and then actually we'll publish a new implementation plan with these dates and then the next dates in the next few months. And we're continuing the journey. There's plenty of work to do every day in this space. There's plenty of work to do with the regulators as well on their consultations. So we do a lot in the trust space. We've got customer education on our radar. We've got lots of technical and different things. Actually, we've got industry working groups. They meet weekly. They have been since 2017. So there's actually a great wealth of knowledge and information available on that. And these are some of the other things on our radar. So we're still looking at UK and Europe. They are meant to be issuing a new payment service direction, PSD3. We think that that's going to really clamp down on things like screen scraping, so we're interested in that. They've just issued, I think we're in the process of working through a Smarter Data Act. I think that might look a little bit similar to Consumer Data Right Act. And also we're really interested in what's going to happen with the UK FTA and what that means for financial services, because they've obviously got a lot of financial services companies up here. Open banking does open up the competition landscape, not just here in Aotearoa, but for overseas companies to come in, so we'll watch that. Australia, obviously, keep watching the CDR developments, and again, on that trade, the trading between our two nations and what that looks like, and they've got some pretty cool fintechs over there that keep looking to New Zealand. And then our next generation payments. So these are the last 2 slides. We wrote a white paper last year that gave a bit of a state of play. It's moved quite a bit since then, and FinTech New Zealand here have actually put out a couple of reports as well. So between us and them, I think if you did some Googling, there'd be some bedtime reading. It might all put you to sleep, but there's definitely some good reading in there about the state of play with open banking in New Zealand. And then actually in the next month or so, we're releasing our next generation payment system work as well. So keep an eye out for that. And that is me. Kia ora koutou.